Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are going to discuss policy research. This lecture is a part of your paper, Communications Research. Have we ever thought to utilize our research knowledge beyond academic pursuit? Can it be applied to solve the problems of state administration to make this real world better? That is what policy research is meant for. It provides policymakers choices and information to frame policy and use research knowledge for a bigger purpose. Policy research can better described as the applied field of research which starts gathering information and ends up with briefing and recommendations. India being a developing country, policy framing and policy research used synonymously as development and planning. Policy research is something more than academic research. Policy research can be defined as the process of conducting research on or analysis of a fundamental social problem in order to provide policymakers with pragmatic, action-oriented recommendations for alleviating the problem. So policy research is different from other kind of research on having action-oriented recommendation methods. Policy research in communication studies. Communication policies are sets of research of principles and norms established to guide the behavior of communication system. They are framed with regard to society's general perception towards communication. Lee in 1976 categorized various bases of communication policy such as communication system, its components and structure, function of the system, who is your target audience, types of information required, nature of policy research. Policy research varies in several ways depending upon the purpose and future use of the research knowledge. But there are many other characteristic features that differentiate policy research from other kinds of research. Let us now discuss the important elements in the nature of policy research. Policy research is multidimensional in nature. Social problems are very complex in nature and are composed of many dimensions. For example, problems of immigration in the US became worse due to the reforms made in the Immigration Reform and Control Act 1986. It has created multiple problems like overpopulation, scarce resources, illegal immigration, and so on. Hence, this Immigration Act was reformulated to reduce illegal immigration gradually. Policy research uses empirical inductive approach to deal with social problems scientifically because of the iterative process where the information and policy formulation are very often interchanged. Policy research is action-oriented and for utilizing in the implementation sphere. For example, NCP, National Child Labour Policy. Policy was reformulated for improvement of child labourers in India. Types in policy research. Policy research can be either field-based or desk-based or both. Let us discuss them in brief. Field research, also known as evidence-based research, when data is collected through reliable sources following systematic procedures, it becomes information. When this gathered information is applied to solve problems, then it becomes evidence. As described by Myatt in 2004 by evidence-based policy research, he meant to the inquiry into nature and origin of problems that public policy wants to solve. Field-based policy research help to find out the causes of the problem and provide appropriate suggestion that changes policy. For example, in 2007, the Maharashtra government website was hacked. After prolonged efforts made by IT experts, the site was restored again. So there is a need of strict IT rules to track them and punish offenders. To change policy, all such evidences needs to be gathered through proper inquiry and analyzed properly to bring appropriate changes in Cybercrime Act. Desk-based policy research or secondary source research. This research is executed by collecting information from already existing sources like newspaper, published reports, media coverage, statistical data and analytical publications. Doing secondary research is essential because it gives a wider insight into the problem. Without knowing what sort of has been work done before, one cannot get the idea about new contributions that can be made. Further, it helps a researcher to become more focused on the area she is studying. Policy research can also vary depending on the objective of funding organizations. The variation depends whether the focus of research is just to define problem or use the outcome of research for further policy information. For example, due to the development in technology, every individual is flooded with information from various sources. This information not only makes individuals aware but also influences their opinions in many respects. Everywhere we have to put our personal details, even the things of deepest privacy, to access this information. Here, the question arises: the right to freedom of opinion and freedom of speech and expression as assured by the Constitution is guided and motivated by these information is unsecured. This is a common social problem regarding right to privacy of individual. This can be put as research topic to form policy for further defining and refining rights of the individual. Stages in policy research. Policy formulation passes through various phases, such as one has to clearly develop the policy agenda before moving for policy research. It makes researcher focus and gives a clear understanding of what he wants and what is needed. Identifying the core objectives and policy options is very important for enlightening the researcher about the appropriate path to proceed. It works as a target point to achieve in a very systematic and focused way. Next, evaluating the options is absolutely essential for analyzing the policy history. Manifest and latent goals of the policy can be interpreted, as well as reason behind policy success or failure can be analyzed for formulating more sound policy. Then policy formulated as a solution to problem rose regarding particular issue. Discussion and opinion poll taken from different stakeholders. Keeping in mind all pros and cons of the issue policy formulated should be taken into consideration. Budgeting or research cost is also an essential factor in formulating policy. Resource or budget allocation towards the implementation of policy is a crucial part. Execution and sustainability of the policy depends on the availability of budget. So after the policy is formulated, concerned authorities allocate fund to run the policy. After formation of the policy, next stage is to implement it. In implementation, sphere concerned official formulate policy into action for the welfare of the people. Next stage to implementation is evaluation. Concerned stakeholders in certain time interval evaluate the policy against the targeted results or objectives to be achieved. It provides an overall idea on success and failure of policy in action and, if needed, any changes to be made. Policy analysis and interpretation. Policy research doesn't follow any comprehensive method of analysis due to diversity in research problems and research questions. In research analysis, data is codified into proper format. Very systematic steps followed to explore facts with accepted standards of scientific behavior. There are several methods of policy analysis, such as before implementation of policy, cost-benefit analysis is conducted to compare the cost, benefits and effect on the society. That leads a researcher to apply a series of methods for identifying alternative policy options, if any. Focused synthesis involves study of literature on particular research questions taken to find solution of specific problem. Policy formed out of purposeful study of relevant literature. For example, AID, Agency for International Development, resolved the water problem of the rural villages by doing focused literature surveys. Secondary method of analysis is the most convenient, cost-effective method of analysis to find solution for policy research questions. Such kind of analysis involves appropriate statistical procedures. For example, study of new media or entertainment media, its effects on common man. Field experiment is a method of collecting data from primary sources. In this method, social problem is solved by intervening into the matter. Such interventions are applied on a target population and data is collected to see the changes. For example, to study the effect of organizational development techniques, Paul and Gross in 1981 conducted field experiment method. This process involved group discussion, workshop for team building, personal counseling, training to improve management skills, etc. Quasi-experiment analysis provides an ultimate solution for randomized experiments in research. This method is particularly useful when no sufficient secondary data is available, time-bound period, or when there are set of no comparison groups. Both the case study and focused synthesis analysis method make a use of qualitative technique to gather information. However, there are other alternatives to gather primary data like structured or semi-structured interviews, individual counseling, participant observation, etc. For example, gathering information from people regarding communal violence in that area. Survey method is suitable when there is longer time limit and population is large in number. In this method, data collection is done through personal interviews or written questionnaires. Data generalization is more accurate due to large number of data support. For example, NSSO surveys. Case study is another useful method to collect primary data due to less time consumption, low cost, and gives a scope for impression analysis of the situation. As identified by Rist in 1982, case study gives a scope for identification of unexpected behavior and several variables associated with it. For example, do the students who failed to achieve their goals suffer psychological damage? Content analysis is a method of study of communication for analyzing content in a more scientific way. Conveyed message analyzed minutely in a more accurate, meaningful context. It worked as an interface between observation and document analysis. Content analysis maintains objectivity, generalizability, systematic procedure. So what are the purposes of content analysis? To describe what, how, and to whom of the context. To discover why and who of the context. To identify the type and intensity of effect of context. So, content analysis is very useful while doing purposeful, focused analysis of huge amount of text. How to communicate your research productively to policymakers. The very objective of policy research is to utilize the gathered information for policy making, but it is only possible when your stakeholders are convinced. Close communication between the researcher and the policymakers will be an added advantage for both. Maharshak in 1984 prescribed 4 guidelines to establish productive communication, such as policy making is a very critical affair. So, it may happen that at any crucial point a single or complete study can be disseminated by the policymakers. To avoid any such situation, policy researchers should remain in constant touch with the policymakers and carry on active communication throughout the policy making process. Throughout the study, the researcher should keep in mind the interest and objective of policymaker. According to Makobaye in 1983, researcher must learn the right time and place to introduce the information to policymakers. Policy research studies could have several users and different interests and objectives. For example, civil society project directors, program managers and officials from Labour Ministry were called to suggest policy changes in national child labour policy. While the civil society was more interested over view of major findings, government officials were interested for recommendations to improve child labour situation in India. So it is very essential for researcher to keep in mind that his studies should adequately capable of communicating to different users. The research study should be well enough to communicate effectively the study outcomes. It is possible only through effective presentation, which forms the basis for maximum utility of the policy research study. Traditionally, research using textual form to disseminate research outcomes to its users. Most of the government data are available in textual format. Now let us summarize what we discussed in the lecture. We learnt about the fundamentals of policy research, its nature, types and various methods of analysis with suitable examples. In communication studies, policy analysis bears an important position as it's highly desirable to understand the context of research and its effect on respective community. Data is collected either through primary or secondary source. Important task is to maintain the objectivity and infer the things accurately to fulfill the very purpose of the research. However, no single method is sufficient to elaborate social phenomena completely. So, series of methods are used in combination to draw the complete picture. We have discussed several methods with their scope and limitations, which will guide researchers to use as per their suitability. Towards end of the lecture, we discussed how to disseminate your research study to maximum users by adopting few techniques. So please do attempt the questions in the self-evaluate quadrant. For further reading, suggestions, please refer to the third quadrant. Thank you.